Alright, well I really love this crossbow, the Killer Instinct SWAT X1. But there's a few things I wish I knew about it before I bought it. One of the things that sets this crossbow apart is the enclosed barrel. It doesn't have a traditional rail, exposed rail, the way most crossbows do. It doesn't have a railless design like some other more modern crossbows have. Instead, it has an enclosed barrel, very much like a rifle. You drop the arrow down in here.
Red up on this one.
Yes. I'm just going to drop her down the barrel. Keep your fingers out of the way, drop it right in there, and then work that little switch. And it drops in here perfect.
That's
got
cool.
It pointed down range, nice and safe. And then once that arrow is loaded and locked in place, it is totally enclosed within this barrel. Now, the jury is still out, in my opinion, about whether that is advantageous. Is that really something that helps us as crossbow hunters? Is it really something that stabilizes arrows? Do those arrows need to be stabilized in the first place? Again, jury is still out on that. That's why I got one of these crossbows, and that is something that I will discuss over time. But I will say this. It's a pain in the neck to lube this rail. It is. And people have asked me how to do it. What I've gathered from Friends of Bunjie with a little bit of experience on the subject is that you get a Q-tip or a paintbrush, a little tiny paintbrush. I don't like using a Q-tip because you put a Q-tip in there, you might leave those little fuzzies all over the place. Brush some lube in there. Then you wax your cables. Okay, wax them good. All that good stuff. It does come with rail lube, but it's a little chapstick-sized container, and you can't put that on this rail. It's really not meant for this crossbow. It came with that, but it can't be really used on this crossbow. Now you can see that I've got a Burris Oracle X scope on here. Those of you who are familiar with Death by Bunjie know the saga behind these scopes and all the troubles that I have had with them in the past. But I bought this crossbow precisely for this scope, for use with this scope. It fits so perfect on here. It just looks perfect, doesn't it? It looks like it's made for there. So I never really considered using the Killer Instinct scope, the scope that came with the crossbow. I am not a fan of Killer Instinct scopes. They have perfectly good glass on them. They're clear enough and everything, but I really don't understand the way that they have the reticles on there. I really don't understand that. I haven't gotten into it, but to each his own. I bought this crossbow for the Burris, and now I'm kind of second guessing the Burris. We'll find out more about that down the road as well with future videos. That's really kind of an up in the air subject, kind of a touchy subject for me. Now I question whether I want the crossbow or not. I want the crossbow. I enjoy the crossbow. It's a lot of fun. It's a very solid piece of equipment, but that's just one of those things. I wished I knew about the longevity of the Burris Oracle X before I bought this crossbow. We'll see. The crank. I kind of like the fact that this is crankable, but it's another thing I wish I kind of knew more about before I bought this crossbow, and maybe you want to know about that as well. The crank that goes on here works perfectly fine. Genevieve had no trouble using it. I have even used it, and I've only cranked a crossbow 3-4 times ever in my entire lifetime. Can you believe that? Not a fan of the cranks, don't like them. This I rope cock, 195-pound draw weight. The X cams are beautiful, 50% let off. It's a breeze for me to cock, maybe not for everybody, but I'm a little over 6 feet tall, so it works out fine for me. Genevieve liked the crank, but it wasn't too much different from cranking her Excaliburs, for what that's worth. And not that that matters. I mean, that's great. It's a familiar system for her. But the hooks kind of pop out at the end. More, just until it will turn back, and then those will pop right out of there. Just something to take into account before you buy one of these crossbows. Now, this is one of those things that you want to be aware of. You have vein and arrow limitations. There are only certain veins and only certain arrows that are going to fit down this barrel. Most of them fit just fine. The ones that came with it work fine out of this. I bought some dragon claws from Wyvern Creations. Our buddy Dave at Wyvern Creations set me up with some really cool dragon claws. Total grain weight of 500 grains, probably a little more than what I need for this crossbow, more than what I actually thought I was going to end up with. I really didn't do my homework on that, but I love them and they shoot great out of here, so I'm going to stick with them and, you know, just not have trouble with pass-throughs this year. That's all. So that's great stuff. So it'll be a lot of fun. Make sure if you have a specific arrow in mind or vein in mind that you're looking at the specs and getting the right ones for this crossbow. It's not going to like the helicals. Also, the quiver. It comes with a quiver that only holds 3 arrows. 3 arrows is not enough for me. I like to have 4, maybe 5 arrows with me at any given time because you never know when that opportunity is going to be presented, and I like to be prepared. With this crossbow, you have to decock it with a decocking arrow, so I need to carry one with a field point or one that I'm going to be firing into the dirt, and I don't want to eat up a 3-arrow quiver, eat up one of those precious slots with a decocking arrow. And I'm not going to fire one of my good dragon claws as a decocking arrow, right? Because you're shooting it real close and it's going to destroy that arrow very soon. I'm not going to ruin a perfectly good arrow as a decocking arrow. Don't mind carrying one with me if I have 5 arrows available in my quiver. So for this crossbow, I won't be mounting the quiver on here. That's another thing. You have the Picatinny rail up front for the quiver. I won't be using that. With small crossbows like this, where you mount the quiver becomes a real issue. It doesn't interfere with your use of the crossbow. It's actually mounted up here, so it's not a problem for mounting on the crossbow or anything like that. There just isn't a lot of room to mount a quiver. The quiver's as big as the crossbow, with some of these more modern crossbows like this one. If that suits you, that's fine. However, for me, what I'm going to do is just carry the quiver on my backpack. The Scorpyd quiver has a clip on it, like a hair clip, and I can clip that right onto my backpack, carry it no problem, and I'll just transfer the arrows out and in and out between this crossbow and the other crossbow. And now for the biggest thing. Speaking of arrows. So this is a crossbow rated at 405 feet per second. If we take that 405 feet per second and we take the advertised amount of kinetic energy generated by this crossbow, we can do the math on our online calculators on deathbybunjie.com, put together with me and Friend of Bunjie Gary, old grumpy hunter, put together some great calculators, and we learned that these speeds were obtained with a 390 grain arrow. All right, we'll get out my handy dandy little crossbow journal. It says right there, crossbow journal. It's a little booklet given to me by Friend of Bunjie Ron, and I can tell you my dragon claws that I put together, around 499, 500 grainers, real big heavy arrows. Those, as we know, shot at 350 feet per second out of that crossbow. Now that's incredible because it's like 135 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, a .776 slugs of momentum, 63% efficiency. This is all based on the math from those Death by Bunjie calculators. You can check those out on deathbybunjie.com. Now, 350 in this day and age is the bottom end of what I would consider a modern speed. 350 to 450 is kind of the modern speed in my book. Over 450, 440 to 470, 500, those are the ultra modern speeds. I'm not there yet. And the under 350, under 360-ish speeds, those are not modern speeds in my book, right, for crossbows. Now, I'm talking out of the box. I'm not necessarily talking with a heavier arrow, because you can slow any crossbow down with a heavier arrow, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if it suits your hunting goals. With this crossbow, though, I went and tested it with the 390 grain arrow. Actually, I used an arrow that I could rig up to around 392.5 grains. The speed was kind of disappointing. 388 on the first attempt, 389 on the second attempt. 131.86 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, 0.67 slugs, and 61% efficiency. Nothing about those numbers is embarrassing, if it weren't for the fact that they were advertising a 405 feet per second speed with this crossbow. Does that kind of make sense? I'm totally happy with 0.67 slugs of momentum with a stock arrow weight that I can increase with very easily. Really, I'm happy shooting 500 grains at 350 feet per second. I think that's awesome, right? 0.775 slugs of momentum, probably a little more than what I want, what I need, but it's still awesome. And we're in the 61%, 63% efficiency. Now, other speeds that I did too, I did like the 440 grain, which is the Scorpyd Deathstalker. I've been shooting a 440 grainer out of that, and that shot at 371 feet per second. What's cool about this is that the Scorpyd Deathstalker is rated at 420 feet per second, I think with a 370 grain arrow, which I've never been able to attain. Okay, never reached that speed with that crossbow. But when I shoot a 440 grain arrow out of the Scorpyd Deathstalker, I end up with about 371 feet per second. This crossbow starts at 388 with a 390, and with a 500 grain arrow only drops to 350. How cool is it that this crossbow is so efficient that it can stay so close to its highest speed, basically its highest speed, with an arrow that weighs 500 grains. 350, 360, 370, 388. So it loses 38 feet per second, 39 feet per second, going from 390 grains all the way up to 500 grains. That's pretty cool. To me, I wish I kind of knew all these numbers before I bought one, and I want you to know these numbers as well. Now, what prompted me to look at the speeds of this crossbow, and I'm so glad I did, but it was a message from a friend of Bunjie. He was telling me about his Raven crossbow, his R26 I think it was, and the speeds he got out of that. Now, hats off to Raven. One thing I'll say, nice about Raven, 100%, is that they tend to reach their advertised speeds, and they do that with a 400 grain arrow. That's pretty cool, so hats off to Raven. This crossbow, I think, was speed rated at 390, but it doesn't get what it was advertised at with 390. Now, after all that, the big question is, do I still like this crossbow? Would I still have purchased one of these, given all that information up front? I can tell you right now, as I stand here before you today, absolutely. Very excited to take this to Maryland with me. By the time you see this, I'll probably already be there and hopefully have been successful with more information to report in the very near future. So stay tuned. And until next time, all hail Bunjie.